in the mid 80s, when I had become friends with his mother, Shari, I met David.
Again.
David was in the Navy at that point, and one of the
Oh, right.
wonderful, huh?
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. One of the wonderful things about the group is that we have fantastic kids, and we've been able to have presentations by them in the past. We've got some coming up, and it's kind of glorious getting to enjoy, there he is, the next generation. So I sent out David's biography because it's better than my saying anything. He'll speak for himself unless Shari wants to say something.
Nothing to say. David speaks for himself.
Okay, David, do you want to take over?
I'd be glad to. Thank
And
you.
welcome.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. It's always fun to meet new people and to make new cognitive connections. And it's one of the benefits of technology. I've been a technologist for many years, and one of the dangers of technology that I've always taught students was that it can disconnect us from other humans. We can stream, we don't have to go to concerts, we don't meet people. But this is an appropriate use of technology, and that's why I brought it up earlier. And so kudos and thank you. As Barbara said, I've known her for a number of years, a number of relationships on my part. And so it's been a while, but I didn't really know Barbara artistically. And so I kind of like this opportunity to discuss on a different level than our relationship has been before, to discuss artwork processes. So
which is basically what restaurant, what are we ordering? A more superficial level than today.
Right. So I appreciate that. And it's nice to see that my brother has joined. Hello, Sam.
He's muted.
He is. All right. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to do something a little differently. I have given presentations before, and typically I've created slideshows, either with PowerPoint or PDF. But I'm going to do a slideshow on my screen this time because I'm doing multiple projects. I'll show 9 projects in photography, and then we can discuss. I'm also platinum palladium printer, if anyone knows what that is, and we could discuss that. But at any time, anybody can ask anything. So I will share the images, and I'll be going in and out of a program to go to different folders because I've created 9 different projects for this. So let me share my screen. And then towards the end, if we want, there are a couple of there are some interesting videos that I can share with people, if anyone is interested in, about platinum printing.
Fun.
The very old printing process from 1873, and it's a contact printing process. And so there's a couple of very short videos of the process itself, which are poignant and very interesting. At least I think so. So I will share my screen now. Interesting. There, can we see?
Yep.
Excellent. So we see a large image.
No, we're
Yep.
seeing multiples of churches.
Then I'm going to stop sharing that way. I'm just going to share my whole screen. There we go.
Nope.
Not yet. How about now?
Yeah. Penny, do you want me to help you?
There we go.
There you are.
Ta-da! He can be taught. All right. So I've written some notes. First of all, again, thank you, Barbara and the Salon for the opportunity. That's fun. And thank you, Mom, for so many things beyond the obvious, which I'll not be discussing today. For teaching art, because I think I got some from osmosis.
Yeah,
Being
you
my
did.
second biggest supporter, Peggy takes that role very seriously. For
Okay.
helping me edit writing sometimes, and for other things I'm forgetting, so forgive me. And we discussed about groups like this, and I believe are important, especially now. And we're so lucky to live in an age where we have this technology. So thank you. So many people are alone, and it's really kind of nice, this interaction. So, in the tradition of many Native American cultures, I'd like to begin by apologizing to the group. If I inadvertently offend anyone or make any cultural faux pas, I apologize in advance. So much of my work is portraiture, portraiture of landscape or portraiture of people. And I've been photographing Native American cultures and people for about 10 or 12 years now. I've been to approximately 60 different reservations across the United States, and have been fortunate enough that word of mouth has preceded me, so people have been ready to be photographed. I will tell you that in all the Native cultures, Native American cultures, that is, Edward Curtis is not respected at all. Because he was one of the first photographers who made a lot of images of Native Americans, and he's not respected because many of the images were staged and were not culturally appropriate. He dressed people up in their regalia that really didn't go well together, but made a nice image. And that is not well respected in the Native American community. I don't consider myself an expert or an intellectual when I speak of photography. It is just my practice, and it's just the way I work. I'm an autodidact in the sense that what the word means, what the term means. I taught myself, I made connections myself, and I just went out and did the work. My stepfather many years ago gave me a piece of advice. He said, if you want to learn to play the piano, don't just buy a book on the piano. You need a piano. And that kind of stuck with me for a lot of years. And so I took that to heart. And much of my work is by going out and by doing it and meeting people and just opening up and being available. So I'm going to show 9 projects today. And again, if anyone wishes to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll stop. Or I suppose if I could see the chat, if I put the chat window up, someone can just chat. And then I can stop and answer any questions. I'll be glad to answer any questions about my process, travels, anybody I've met in this series of projects. So the first group of projects are about abandoned churches. These abandoned churches are on different Native American reservations. And what I kept noticing was that I kept finding these abandoned churches. And what happened was congregations, primarily from the east coast of the United States, would go to Indian reservations. They'd raise money in the east and they'd go to Indian reservations and they would build a church and try and start a congregation in order to convert the heathen or the non-Christians. And what they found was that it's hard. And after a while, they lost interest. at first they would come out there and they would feed the people, the Native Americans, and people would go and eat and they would like that very much. But they didn't always take to the spirituality of it and the spiritual practices. And so a lot of these churches were not destroyed. And I found that very interesting. Oddly enough, most of the churches now are protected and they're historic buildings. So I think it's interesting that even if people wanted to buy the land and wanted to knock them down, they can't. I also found it interesting that the spirituality of the congregation and of the people from the East who are coming out to the reservations to convert, the Native Americans to Christianity, they needed a building. They needed a place, which is not normal in the Native American community or in their history. And much like our history, I'm Jewish, sites are made sacred by doing certain things, in Jewish culture, and that was well written about. But Native Americans also perform ceremonies, and that got me to thinking about places of worship and how people worship. And so that's what inspired this group of images. So with that, this is the first image. I won't tell you about where each image is or anything like that, and I won't bore you in that way unless someone is interested and they ask. All I'll do is I will show you these images, and when I come to a new set of images, I'll explain that set.
Are these abandoned?
Every one. They're all abandoned Christian churches.
What I just put in the chat is if you could just if it's easy, just quickly say where and when. I'd love to hear it. When they were built, or if you know that may not be known.
Most of them I do not know.
Okay.
I know where they are. Most of these in this group of images are in South Dakota, across 5 or 6 different reservations, from the Brulés to Rosebud, to the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota reservations, as well as Pine Ridge. One of the churches in this series was built, many of them were built in the 19th century. And one of them was actually a place where they handed out blankets to Native Americans, including ones that were infected with smallpox. And that is still standing, even though it was known by the Indian agent at the time. It was a way of controlling the population.
Yeah.
And it cannot be torn down, because again, it is a protected site. And I find that very troubling. But
Has it been fumigated?
I think it has been once or twice. They probably have a little Lysol, Mom.
Awful.
When did the missionaries come in to convert them?
Well, they stopped in the 1970s, all the way to the 1970s. it was illegal. First of all, Native Americans were not citizens of the country of the United States until after World War I. And Native Americans have been involved in every single war, even during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, War of 1812 and all of that. They were used in many different fashions. There were sharpshooters. There is a well-known platoon, I guess is the Army term, a company, that's the term, of sharpshooters in the Civil War that were all Native American. There were obviously code talkers. There were people of a lot of different jobs. They have the highest percentage of any ethnicity of volunteering for the US military. About 25% of Native Americans join the military, and for a lot of reasons. I'm not an expert. This is what I've learned on my travels. Some of those reasons are economic reasons, because there's very few jobs on the reservation. Other reasons are because it is also their land and they want to protect it. I mean, they know white people and they know the atrocities and they know what's happened, but they don't want to take a chance on a different group of people coming in. And so there's some of that going on as well. I'll get to more of their involvement when I show some of their portraits, because I've made a number of portraits of Native American veterans, including World War II and some of the code talkers. The code talkers, again, were used in the Pacific theater, not in Europe. And so there were mostly Marines and mostly in Asia, in the Pacific theater. So I know that's a long-winded answer to your question about the church. This was also used as a school. I loved this image because of the owl on the top.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a thing for owls. %90 of these churches, you can walk inside. In many of the churches, I found horses walking through there. They're just wide open. Many of them still have electricity.
But you had to be very tall to turn the light on.
And that group of images got me to thinking, as I mentioned earlier, about places where what has happened there. Does land have a memory of some sort? This image is not on a reservation. This is on the 75th anniversary of D-Day in Normandy. While the Germans were shooting and trying to kill everybody who came aboard, who came on land. And this is what the land is being used for now. Someone is exercising their horse. I just found it an interesting image. So that got me to thinking about what does land have a memory, and can we make those kinds of images that might show that? Or is it simply contextual? This was simply a cloud coming out of a building a bunker.
So we're in Normandy now, David?
Yes, and we're going to go back to the United States.
Okay, I just wanted to see where I was.
Now we're back in the United States, and if land has a memory about what has happened there, the bad, could we show the sacred in landscapes? And again, I see these all as portraits. And this was a statue of a Buddha that was facing the other way, and I just thought that the snow looked like wings. This is in a monastery in Missouri, a Buddhist monastery, and they just have statues of Guanyin in the forest. And this was here in Chicago on the Eisenhower. Just advice.
Driving on the Eisenhower scares you.
Right.
Yeah. But I thought such an interesting thing to say and yet be locked up behind barbed wire.
Yeah. It's cool.
And this is that same image as before in color.
Mm.
Just to show my mom that I do some color sometimes. And I think
David, it looks like those churches you're showing, you say they're protected, but they sort of don't look maintained.
they're
And
not maintained at all.
I wonder if you think they're just going to turn into barns. You know, barns ultimately sort of collapse. Do you think these churches are all going to finally bite the dust?
I think they are. I think that the majority of them, there's if memory serves correctly, there's 213 in South Dakota. And I don't wish to get political, but they don't spend any money on anything historical in South Dakota. I mean, the previous administration, the previous president asked the governor of South Dakota if they could put his face on Mount Moore.
And deface the monument.
And deface the monument. I mean, so I don't think they will ever be maintained. I truly don't. I think, again, this was a school and people use these buildings as sites for dropping off goods that have been donated, like coats in the winter for kids on the reservation and other things. There is a movement to use the buildings, but no one is going to put money in them because nobody really owns them. One of them, of the churches, they house firewood for the elders of a different tribe. A lot of the young people will cut wood and put them on trailers and deliver them to the church so that family members can go get it for their elderly family members, so they can survive the winter. Yes,
Typically, the land that the churches are sitting on, is that owned by the Native Americans?
that's a good question. In South Dakota, in the Lakota area, every person got 60 acres. And some of those people divvied up their 60 acres and sold some of the land. So some of the land was sold to a church, and then the church didn't do anything with it after they left. I mean, they built it and they did all of that, and then they just left. They abandoned it. So there is a question of legality of, does it go back to the family or does it not? It's an interesting question, Merle. Thank you. You know, that's really all I know about it. So that was the end of the churches.
Well, you might be making the final record of these churches then, David. I mean, if they're on their way to decline, you might be
Mhm.
making some of the final documentation of these churches.
Maybe,
Probably.
maybe I get calls quite often from different native tribes saying, hey, we found another one for you, this or that. And I've gotten lists from the South Dakota government
Wow.
of where they are. It's just having enough time to do all the work. These are 98% of what I'm going to show you are personal projects and not commercial projects. So they're self-funded.
Can you say anything about the murals, David?
No, I can't, because nobody remembers that I have spoken to about how the artwork and what it represents.
Okay.
It looks like some of the blankets they weave.
They do, though I will tell you that most of the blankets nowadays they get are Pendletons.
Actually, Sherry, they don't have a historical memory as what those
Yeah.
things mean. I mean, I'm talking about those designs. I mean, they're quite
Mhm.
familiar with them and they're very cultural. But if you ask them what they symbolize, they won't remember because they
It's a
weren't.
shame. Yeah.
I don't think they really know.
They're not unlike the Pennsylvania Dutch hex designs. Ones that were on the side of that church.
Mhm.
Right.
But
Yeah,
you
the
do
St.
see
Andrews
those-
Church.
you do
That's
see
right.
On blankets, on Navajo blankets, actually. And of course, this is nowhere near where the Navajo are. So I don't,
And you see similar friends of mine who live in Arizona and New Mexico have sent the artist friends have sent pictures of murals, and the patterning is very similar to what
It is, but there's a movement between tribes, and these people in South Dakota, they don't make pottery. And so we see the iconography a lot in pottery as well as in murals, but there's a migration. I know people quite often who are native who go all over the place to see relatives.
Mhm.
do you want me to mute it?
This group of images is about the Sundance and the Ghost Dance ceremonies.
Ooh.
I've been to a number of them, and they were outlawed in our country until 1978. So there were a lot of private ceremonies that happened, but they had to be done hidden in a hidden fashion because, again, it was illegal. Which astounded me when I learned this. I mean, this is after the civil rights. This was when I was in high school. And so I just said, wow, how can this be? So I went to a number of Sundance ceremonies, and I was invited out. I worked on a couple of films, and I would camp, and that's my tent there. I would camp on a medicine man's land on his 60 acres. And the Sundance, this particular Sundance on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is done on the first full moon of July, is the culmination of the third day. So this is where I camped. Those are my tire tracks. And that's the full moon that we see in the sky. I was protected when I went out there. Is a lot of drug use. There are a lot of unsolved murders. It's not the safest place to be. But because I had met a number of people and I was the guest of the medicine man, I knew enough that when when darkness came, the sun went down, I didn't leave his land. I didn't have to go shopping or do anything. I would go to my tent and read a book by flashlight most times. But it was fascinating. This is the kind of desolate landscape that we see there.
I'm curious, was there anything being at the Pine Ridge, Was there anything about the Wounded Knee Massacre or
There is.
an indigenous respect for the culture of the Native American?
Absolutely. And I've got some images that I will show you of Wounded Knee. The Wounded Knee is, first of all, it's a town. There is and I'll show you a mass grave site that there was a massacre there in the 1870s. And then again in the 1970s, there was a church there, and that's when the American Indian movement, or where the American Indian movement used as a center. And so, yes, they respect it a lot. Native Americans, the ones I know, absolutely believe land has a memory and absolutely believe that places have power. And so that's kind of, after speaking with them and learning about them, I wanted to see what that would be like to photograph. This is pre-dawn right outside my tent. This is still near Pine Ridge. It's in the Badlands, and it's where Sitting Bull, or I have been told, we're near Sitting Bull evaded capture for 2 years
Oh,
from the government. And again, I was camping there. And this is right on the edge, sorry, of a series of cliffs and of the Badlands. Native Americans also think that other places have power. This is Bear Butte. I will show you 2 views of Bear Butte. This is the first one. And they named this mountain Bear Butte because the legend has it that this looks like a sleeping bear as it's lying down.
couldn't fool me.
No, but this is a sacred mountain where they go and have what they call a humblecha. And a humblecha is a ceremony where they go to purify themselves 2 months or 60 days before the Sundance ceremony. And the Sundance ceremony is the culmination of their yearly prayers. And that is the ceremony in which, like in the movie A Man Called Horse, they pierce themselves and they give flesh offerings. And they, for 4 days, they do not eat or drink. And they dance 3 or 4 times, or once an hour or so, they do 15 minutes of dancing. And there's a whole ritual about it. But this is where they go to cleanse themselves. It's Bear Butte. I made this image not because it was fenced in. You can actually hike up it, and I've hiked up it, but you can't really get the sense of the place. And the odd thing about it is this, across the street from where I was standing, is one of the most famous bars from the motorcycle rally in South Dakota.
Oh,
So here we have, again, another example of sacred, and you turn around and this is another view.
I've been there, and the land, when you talk about the land having memory, near there, I've saw remaining signs of the wheel tracks from the covered wagons that went west.
That's
Wow.
right.
Even now, there is scars, if you want to call them, whatever, on the land from that time.
And they had a railroad there that's interesting. Right outside, this is the Badlands National Park. It's a national park now. And they had railroad tracks that are abandoned. But those railroads came to Chicago directly in the 1920s.
Hmm.
And there was a gangster a Chicago gangster that would take a private car up there and would get whiskey brought in from Canada through North Dakota to South Dakota and brought into Chicago. And that was one of the routes.
Was his first name Al?
It was. And the most interesting thing I think about this park, a friend of mine who's out there, who lives out there, he has a bed and breakfast now, but his grandparents, they were homesteaders. They had 160 acres. And the father was raised there. You know, the grandparents came out there in the 1800s and then raised family and then raised the next generation. Well, this friend of mine who was there, he was working there, and he's a Christian. He's a white fellow. And they're nice, very nice people. They now have a bed and breakfast there that CNN went to stay on when they were out there for reporting from South Dakota. Well, this fellow wanted to find someone to marry, and he went to the West Wall in Israel and prayed for a wife and put the note in the wall, went home to South Dakota, and one of the park rangers for the Badlands National Park fell in love with the place, fell in love with him, and they both run this bed and breakfast called Circle View Ranch that is on the original homestead, and they have 3 beautiful babies.
Oh, that's nice.
Lovely story.
Sweet.
It is nice. And they're great people. But you're right. Outside of this, there are wagon trains. There are signs that say, don't go near the prairie dogs. They carry the plague, even to this day.
Wow.
It is a very desolate place. It is, in many ways. I mean, they have Wall Drug, but you can't buy a fresh orange.
But Wall Drug has a fabulous bookstore in it.
As they do, as does Rapid City in South Dakota. They do have good bookstores, and they have great pancakes. But again, one of the reasons when I go out there, I find that Native Americans, and I've cooked for them, you know, when I've gotten to make their portraits, I've actually, you know, gone said I'd like to cook, and someone lends me a kitchen. I go out and do the shopping. They have all their meat cooked very well done. And the reason is because it's not great quality. I found ground bologna in the grocery stores. I've never seen that before. And it was a
Not
real
in my house.
unnatural color. It looked like meat bubble gum. It was horrible. Anyway, these are the Badlands in South Dakota. This looked very nondescript, except for the fact that this is where they held some sun dances. One family did for over 100 years. And they left the land when they were done with it as it was.
But I'm also seeing a track there, David.
There are that's 4-wheel drive. They just drive everywhere they wish.
Okay.
Speed limits and roads are optional. This is at a Sundance ceremony. One family that has a Sundance, they planted a cottonwood tree when it became legal to have Sundance ceremonies. And what we see along the trunk of the tree are all the sun dancers. They make little tobacco ties, and the tobacco ties are prayers. Each have to make 400, and they have to make them in different colors. There are 4 colors. There's red, white, yellow, and black. And they encircle the trunk of the tree. We see ropes that are hanging down. And on those ropes, they put a sharpened piece of wood where they incise someone's chest in two places and put the piece of wood as a dowel on both sides through their chest. And then they are raised into the tree. And that is part of the flesh offering when they are giving flesh during the Sundance ceremony. The foreground, we see a number of buffalo skulls that are all tied together. And those people who really want to give and make an offering will have two dowels put on their back of their shoulders, one through behind each shoulder blade, and then a rope is tied to these 6 buffalo skulls, and the person, the dancer, goes around the ring, and you see around the ring, pulling the buffalo skulls until the flesh rips. And this image was made after the Sundance ceremony, and that's one of the dancers who was still praying. This is a single image. This is not a double image. It's not a double exposure. I took one of the buffalo skulls. I had permission, of course, and I had someone off camera above hang it down by fish line or some light line, and that line I took out in Photoshop, but it's a single image and very indicative of their ceremonies. The opening to the circle is facing east. That's another thing that's very important to them.
What are the flags? Oh.
These flags, every family has their own. They have these sets of flags. You see a Marine flag, an American flag, and then a Native American flag. This is where the dancers would go during the heat of the day. After they danced, they would go and sit in the cool shade when they could. Or when the medicine man allowed, when he told them that they could. Every night they have sweat lodge ceremonies, and the medicine man said, "Grab your camera and come
Looks
make
like
an
a
image."
figure of a woman.
People see different things in this. Technically, it's not a great image, but I don't think it's meant to be. It's an experiential image. So we were heating the rocks for a sweat lodge ceremony at the end of every day during the Sundance ceremony. The dancers and anybody else who wanted to, who was invited, could go to the sweat lodge ceremony and participate and pray along with the dancers. And this is heating the rocks. And the rocks, there's a specific number of rocks that are heated, and they're in what order they are brought into the Sundance, or I'm sorry, into the sweat lodge. And there are 4 rounds of heating rocks or of bringing rocks in. And they bring 7 rocks in at a time, and they are called their grandfathers. They're praying to their ancestors. And it's quite a lovely ceremony. I've been to a number of them in a number of different states, and I found it wonderful. Again, the land just seems to go on forever.
It's so flat without any high rises.
It is so flat without high rises.
God, we have no view here. Yeah.
No, the land is something. And what you see here, some of those are hills in the background, but these are kind of little valleys. They dip down. Some of them can dip down 100 feet and can go for miles. And that's where Sitting Bull went and hid.
And when I was there, it smelled wonderful of sweetgrass.
Sweetgrass and
Just
sage.
at night, Sweetgrass and with the windows open in the car, it was just wonderful.
I have some sweetgrass and sage around here in the house, and it does smell wonderful. This is the same Sundance ceremony or ceremonial grounds from above, from one of the hills by where I was camping. For the ceremony, they don't use this outhouse. They call porta potties now, which is kind of nice. Nicer. But in the center here, that was that tree that we saw before. This is before the Sundance ceremony. This is a sweat lodge skeleton that is made of willow bark or willow saplings and cottonwood as well. And there are exactly 16. The opening faces east, and they cover this with hides and blankets, and that's where they bring in those rocks and they put them in the center, and anybody who is participating sits with their back along the exterior wall. And all of these ties are prayers, these different ties. This was an image where I saw this robin flitting around, and I just waited patiently for about 10 minutes for this robin to leave.
Didn't speak English.
Well, I don't know. I'm not smart enough to have spoken to it. And I think that is that set of images. This set of images is a little more lyrical. The theme for this set of images was impermanence and how things change and change happens. And it kind of got me to thinking about the connection between Buddhism or Zen and jazz and photography. And this is really the sounds of the river. And this is when I was visiting a friend in northern Wisconsin on the Trade River. So this series of images is all about that experience. And that was that project.
Okay.
This next set of images is a set of portraits, survivors of domestic violence. Some are natives, some are native veterans. I have a man who's in this project as well. But I wanted to show you these in color, Mom, since you've never seen them.
Yeah.
Many of these portraits, I wanted to really, the word honor isn't right, but to let people tell their stories. And part of that for me was to have my camera below their eye level so that we're looking up to the person. I also wanted these images to look like paintings because photography does stem from painting in the sense of as an art form, not as the science of it, but the art side of it. You know, photography was always the little brother of painters, and painters had an interesting relationship with photographers, and that they didn't think that photography was an art, and yet many painters use photographs as references. I just had a show in Germany that was online. It was a collaborative show with a Chinese painter, an ink painter, and his paintings look like street photographs, and my portraits look like paintings. And that's why we got together and did that show. But this set of images, these survivors of domestic violence, are all in color.
David, is that show you had in Germany online so that we could see it?
I'll make sure to get everyone the link. I'll send it to you, Barbara.
Lovely, thank you.
I was going to shelters and setting up a mobile studio and making portraits of people in the shelter who lived there, who had escaped their abusers. I showed this body of work at a portfolio review, and a director of a fine arts center in the West saw these images and said, well, I hate it when men are making these kinds of images, and you should have had the subjects hold pictures of their abusers.
Ooh.
And I thanked her
right.
for her opinion, and I said, well, that's not my project.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I found out later that she had
Good
also,
answer.
what's the only answer that I could come up with, because
Good one.
again, Joseph, everyone has an opinion, and some
Yeah, they
people's
do.
opinions are
opinions.
they are, but some are educated and well reasoned, and some are not, and that's okay. That's a different discussion.
Right.
But I thought that was an interesting reaction, and I found out from a gallerist that the person reviewing my work that day had been through a tough relationship herself. So it was her response. It wasn't a
Of
personal
course,
response. It was, what it invoked in her. So that was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
This young lady was beautiful, had a lovely child,
Lovely.
had been with her abuser for 7 years. She was only 23 when I made this picture. Her abuser would not let her swim or drive or have a job. And this is in America, in the United States, within the last 10 years. Still happening.
Oh, beautiful.
He has
Was his
horrible.
abu- Was his abuser a woman or a man?
His abuser was a woman. Horrible PTSD. This fellow has. He's also a Vietnam veteran.
And his abuser, David?
I don't know her. I've not
Okay.
met her. But he speaks of her. And it's just very hard for him to get beyond that experience. I asked these Native women to bring something that they treasure. And some did, some didn't.
Oh.
And I would set up, this was not in a shelter, I would set up a studio. I have backdrops and strobes and lights. I set up at a Native American place. And they knew me. They know me because I've done other work with natives. And so they felt safe and they would tell me their story. And so this is one of the lessons I learned about portrait photography is that portraits don't have to be perfect. They have to be effective. And effective is entirely different than the proper pose.
Mm-hmm.
Or the equipment we use.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by effective?
That's a very good question. That the image conveys an emotion or conveys who that person is at that point in time. At that moment. And this woman is,
David,
yes.
David, when you would initially approach one of your subjects and explain your project, what would you tell them the photograph is for? And did they have any concerns about it might be seen in a way that would bring them jeopardy?
No.
Mm.
To the second part of your question, that has never entered anyone's mind. Or at least it wasn't verbalized, let me say that, because maybe it wasn't, I just don't know, Merle. That's a good question. I had given a number of talks and discussions, one at the University of Nebraska. So people have heard of my work, and others at different Native American places. And I've been accepted into the culture fairly well. And so they know who I am. I have signed releases of them that I can use the images as I wish, but I always tell all of my subjects in my work, don't worry. First of all, these images aren't even on my website. And I always tell people, listen, I will never use these images to sell Budweiser or anything commercial like that. And I'm trusted. And that is, I would never betray that trust. For that reason, because the work that I do, especially with these different groups of people and these different subject matters, if I were to break that trust, then I would not be able to make these images again. And that wouldn't do very well. One of the participants in this project lost 2 children due to medical conditions. And she asked me and someone else to do a project, and I got Peggy involved, my partner Peggy, involved in this as she's helping me coordinate it for people who have lost children due to medical conditions. And many of them are Native American. And so that's the project we're working on this year.
I'm just curious. There's a little paradox here for me. The pictures are posed, looks like a fairly formal setting, and yet what I find so interesting is the faces are so full of affect and spontaneity. I'm wondering if there is is it just you and how you
Yes.
approach your subject, or do you do something intentional to bring that aspect out of the personality?
Yes and yes. In the sense, no, that's a tough question. It's a very an insightful comment or sets of comments, two comments. When I make images, I don't use the word take, capture, or shoot. I make images.
Mhm.
Those other verbs are verbs for guns and verbs for war, very male dominant verbs. And that's okay. I'm not making a judgment other than in my work, I choose to have a different set of verbs. I make images and my portraits are made collaboratively. So I design portraits. I set up the technical, as Barbara says, the fiddly bits, all the technical aspects. I know the lighting, I know, where they're going to stand. I know the power of the lighting ratios, whether I'm using one light or two lights, all of that stuff. I bring the backdrops, all of that. Once I figured that out, I can forget about it. Now I can work with someone. And now I can use my digital camera that I hook up to my 4x5 and never lose contact with the person and get their story. And they speak to me. And in an hour, I might make 4 images, maybe 6. It's really our time together.
So you're talking.
Yes,
Mhm, mhm.
because I believe that it is a photographer's job to make that person feel at ease and break through that fake. We all have that face that we make when someone points a camera at our face. We have that mask that we put on, the smile, the same smile. And if someone does that, I'll make those pictures, but then I'll wait and we'll speak. I made a picture of a biker a number of years ago, and I sat on a stool facing him, and I went to shake his hand, and I wouldn't let go. I held his hand for a number of minutes, and it got very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And then he relaxed, and then I let go, and then we got to work.
Mhm.
Why are they getting their pictures taken? I'm very curious. I mean, the shots are definitely artistic, I suppose. But why are they being photographed? Because you said you have a lot NDA that you won't use them in an odd way. Obviously, you'll use it very respectfully. Because of all the shots you've shown, there's only the African American who had a smile. Because I am trying to understand why they're posing.
This was for a project that is on an online exhibit right now, and it's to bring awareness that in this day and age, people are still this mean to each other. And so this was a project, and it's going to keep going. I work on it, and I brought it to a gallery, and they put it online. And this will be a traveling exhibit and will be in DC, Washington, DC, because many of these are veterans. So that was the goal of it wasn't the goal when I started. When I started, someone asked me to do it, as in one of the participants asked me to make an image of people who have lost children. And by the way, there's no word that I know of in the English language or in Italian for someone who's lost a child. We can be a widow,
called mother.
or an orphan, but there's no word for this, for that. So the goal of this project, and I do have an NDA, was just to allow people to share their story and to, I don't like to use the word honor, but to let them be who they are. And so I start these projects like that, and then I figure out what to do with them. Some of them, because again, these are personal projects. But I think that these are important projects in the sense of Dayenu. I mean, I don't mean to take myself so seriously, but I think that photography has a role, and photography can be used in many ways. And I think this is one way that just makes sense to me.
What was that word you used? Dayenu? What does that mean?
Well,
Barbara, what does that mean, Barbara?
What?
What does
Dayenu.
Dayenu mean?
Dayenu? Enough.
Is that English?
No, it's Hebrew.
Yiddish, I think.
Oh, okay.
Or
Thank you.
it's
No,
not Hebrew?
in the song, it would have been enough.
And the way I read it or interpret it, that if it's someone else's struggle, may it be our struggle. And that we are in this together.
It's Hebrew.
Oh, thank you. Pam.
Thank you,
I look
Penelope.
it up.
We needed that levity, but thanks.
And so that's that group of images. These are general portraits.
Oh,
This young lady, this was for a hunger campaign that I did, a commercial job. She was 4 years old. I didn't even fix her hair or anything. I just said, wow. She's right here in Chicago, Eastern European, and she just had that look. Could have been made at any age. It's just,
Yeah.
has that look.
I'm sorry, could you go back to that picture? I'm riveted. What look? This is for the hunger campaign?
Yes, but her look was kind of mocking me
Oh,
in a
so
sense.
she's amused by you.
Yes, and so I don't think that the art director ended up using this image for the intended person, but I just loved the image, just the eye contact.
Cute.
It was a hard image to make because she's tiny and I had to get down on the ground almost.
That's wonderful.
Mm.
This was a gang member here in Chicago. This was just a portrait I made of a statue, just I felt rotten that day. Something political had happened and I heard it on CNN and I just went out and made an image. So I put it in here because sometimes I believe that portraits don't just have to be a portrait of a person. This was a statue in a church around the corner from my house.
Yeah.
This is an Italian movie maker. This is another photographer, Sandro Miller. He's from
Yep.
Chicago.
He's fabulous.
He did all the, he worked a lot with Malkovich and did all the pictures of Malkovich as an homage to all other photographers.
Well, he also did a lot of the Dance for Life photography.
Mhm.
Exactly. And he did some cancer. He's a friend of mine and asked me to make his portrait.
Ah,
That's very cool.
This is a dancer, interesting fellow. He said his father never hugged him
ooh.
because he's gay. So I gave him a big hug. I
I
said,
was just gonna say, did you hug him? Of course you did.
yeah, I did. And so then he started dancing. He's a dancer. I'd set up the studio.
Wonderful.
And I said, you know, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, beautiful. What does that say, David?
Learn to live, love to learn. And that is the series of those portraits.
Now, this is my favorate group.
Girl,
Yeah.
girl earring.
This was a set of images and portraits I made. A girl with the pearl earring. Again, this is a personal project because I got very angry at the political turmoil that we had when a past administration talked about shithole countries.
Yeah.
And so I got people from all around the world, including my niece, my brother's daughter, who was so gracious to sit for me. But I used the same props. Peggy was my stylist. This woman is from Argentina. We got Argentina, we have Europe, South Africa, Germany, around the world. I just chose 3 or 4, maybe 6 images for this project. The lighting was a little different for this.
There she is. That's our girl.
Yeah. Sam, are you still here?
You were
Poor
gonna
Sam.
put an earring on that for me.
Oh, pearl.
I'm moving on. This was a Native American woman. She's also an artist and a painter. And she said she wouldn't wear a pearl earring, but she would wear a Native American earring. These are coyote.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
I said, absolutely.
Just fabulous.
beautiful girl.
A German woman.
Oh, I like that.
From Shanghai. Trinidad.
Beautiful.
Yeah, we've gotten Filipino people. I've gotten some Mayans. I did some work with a Mayan group and Native Americans. And so I have some Mayan women. I have not gotten any men yet, but I would like to. And I think that's that set of images. Girl with the pearl earrings. This was for Elgin, is a suburb outside of Chicago. It is their LGBTQ community asked me to make portraits for their first parade that was supposed to happen last year, but then didn't happen because of the pandemic. And this is the woman who asked me to make these images. And I just love this image because it's the color of royalty, her purpleness. There's just a few images here.
It's beautiful.
she's a very interesting person. She's transitioning to a woman, and she is a pilot for a major airline, and her employer has been nothing but supportive. Just, isn't that wonderful in this day and age? Love the color of his hair, but you know.
This guy was in a lot of publicity for that parade.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I had trouble with him,
Uh,
having him keep his clothes on. I said, I'll make any images you want, but I can't show them to many places if you do that. And he's a very nice guy. He's really a brave individual. I don't know if you know him. But he has gone around the country and lived in all sorts of places, and he has not had high-level jobs. He just wanted to go live in the mountains, so he'd go live in the mountains and have a small job there.
no, he's easy to recognize because of his hair and his face. And
Right,
yeah.
right. Really a nice fellow.
Is his hair always the same color?
When I knew him, I don't know at any other time.
Yeah. I mean, it matches his outfit, which is,
Perfectly. It matches.
or his outfit matches his hair, depending on how you look at it.
And Mom, do you recognize this sweater?
Yeah.
He didn't like the t-shirt he had on, so I gave him my sweater for this image. And it's a sweater my mother gave me for my birthday one year. And I think that's that project.
Okay, this is what I was hoping to see.
What a great face.
He's from the Puyallup tribe in Washington State. And he sent me, his cousin works on salmon fishing boats and is on the show. He's on a show on Discovery, Most Dangerous Catch,
Oh, I
something
watched
like
that.
that. Yeah, and they go fishing. So I have a bunch of salmon and smoked salmon in my freezer that they sent me as a thank you, and that the tribe had actually smoked themselves. But he's a huge man. He's about 6'7". And this man is part of the Pala tribe from Southern California. And this image was just used at his funeral. An original code talker, Marine, wheelchair bound when I met him.
In France, right?
No, this was not in France. And this image has been in a few different museums and is in DC right now. The VA used this image.
Mhm. Mm.
This is a homeless veteran with his therapy dog. He lives in a van. And I guess that's his home. So maybe he's not homeless. But a sweet guy nonetheless. He's Lakota and grew up in and around the Badlands.
Oh, yeah.
This man is, his name is Charles Shea. He was on the first wave at D-Day in Normandy. and he was a medic. He had no weapons of any kind. He's 96 years old, and we just finished a documentary about him that showed on WTTW in November. He looks fantastic for being 96. So I'm supposed to go visit him this summer. We'll see if we can travel.
And what is his tribe?
His tribe is out of Maine, the Penobscots.
Penobscot.
Penobscot tribe from Maine, but he now lives in Normandy full time.
Wow.
He had some medical issues, and the tribe didn't do much for him. They wouldn't help him to get to the doctor or anything. And a woman out of France, who just turned 59 yesterday, inherited a company and bought a piece of land and got a Charles Shea Memorial Park in Normandy at the place where D-Day was, where he landed. And he lives there now in a nice, comfortable chateau. And he's absolutely earned the right in his life. He was also taken a POW in Korean War. He worked for the UN as well. He's well-spoken. He speaks French. And just a lovely, lovely fellow. It was really an honor to meet.
Who's the man with him?
His name is Joe Podlasek, and he is half Polish and half Ojibwa from the Wisconsin area. And he runs a Native American cultural center. And he has hired me. He's a producer for a number of documentaries that we've made together. This person is part Ponca, part Winnebago, and part Omaha tribe. Currently lives in Nebraska, and he is a Vietnam veteran as well. This was the oldest male. He's a Korean War veteran from the Omaha tribe, but he was one of the 10 remaining fluent Omaha speakers that I made portraits of. Her name is Glenna, and she hates this image.
I think it's wonderful.
She says it makes her look sick.
Oh my God, no.
I
Not
know.
at all. It makes her look spiritual.
I just think it's lovely.
Yeah.
This is her in front of her ancestral home, the home she grew up in, actually. It's in a small town on a reservation in Nebraska. The town is called Macy, Nebraska, and that house has no running water or electricity, but they have a piano. No one lives there now because you can see there's holes in the roof. However, she had four siblings, 3 sisters and a brother, and there were 3 master's degree and a doctorate degree came out of the house. And one of the people just got out of the hospital from COVID, just released.
Oh,
This is a young lady. I've got a few of these made where she's showing me her jingle dress. And the jingle dress is a dress for healing. And last year was the 100-year anniversary. 2019 was the 100-year anniversary of the jingle dress. So she was showing me her jingle dress. She was so tiny, I got a small table that I put a blanket on and just put her on top of the table. So she's standing on it and she's almost my height. Or she was a little taller than me. That's how small she was.
That's sweet.
And she's showing me her jingle dress.
So these were two different dresses, one an original and one hers currently?
They're both current. They're both recreations.
Okay.
And what tribe was this?
One is Winnebago and one is Omaha,
Okay.
but both in Nebraska.
I was just looking up where Macy, Nebraska is.
It's in the northeast corner.
Yeah. Just south of Sioux City.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the city of Winnebago. And this young lady, her name is Mia, and I call her my Mona Lisa. But her mother was in the room and was telling her to smile, smile, smile. And, you know, this young lady wouldn't. So I asked the mother to leave and I'd take care of it. And I asked the young girl, why aren't you smiling?
She lost a tooth, huh?
She lost 2 or 3 teeth and has no
Of
teeth.
Right, of
course.
course, we know
Of
that.
And she was just adorable.
Yeah, this is a sweet picture.
And this is my Native American Gothic.
Really.
Are they brothers and sisters too?
No, they're married.
Nah.
After a while, you look alike.
They do. They do. Another veteran.
Yeah.
His name is Saginaw Grant. He is lives in LA and he's from a tribe out in California and he's been an actor for a number of years. He was in that show about that chemistry teacher who ended up making drugs.
Breaking Bad.
Bad.
Thank you. And
I
he's
never
also
saw that.
done a number of movies. I've never seen the show and I can never remember the name of it, but he's done a number of movies.
They all look so proud.
They have a dignity.
Mhm.
The people that I have met
Yeah.
have a dignity. I worked on a film once outside of, you're in Pine Ridge, and 2 miles outside of Pine Ridge is a 6-lane highway. And that 6-lane highway is only 3 miles long, maybe 4 miles long, and it goes to White Clay, Nebraska. And White Clay, Nebraska is just a main street filled with bars and liquor stores. And this producer for this documentary wanted to hand me a number of $20 bills and go into White Clay, Nebraska and make pictures of drunks.
Oh,
Oh, no.
So
No.
I didn't, obviously.
Right.
We call that reservation porn is what we call it, res porn.
Oh, terrible.
White Clay since has closed down all of the liquor stores there. The city council, and by the way, all of the liquor store owners and the bar owners were white.
Oh, how abusive.
It's very abusive. And on that stretch of land, there are the most fatalities in any road in the continental United States. But there's such a dignity on the other side. There are some people who, you know, fall into the bottle. And there are other people who are very spiritual. And this woman, her name is Octa. She's one of the sisters of that woman that I showed you before, Glenna. But her jawline reminds me of my grandmother.
Oh, yes, it does. Yeah.
So that was this portrait. This is one of the siblings who just got out of the hospital. That's why,
COVID?
yes, from COVID. And it wasn't a great portrait. He was a little nervous, but I put it in because he just came out of the hospital. He's okay. He's getting much better.
Good.
And he's got a doctorate. This gentleman was a singer from another tribe who's in the Library of Congress, singing sacred songs of a couple of different tribes.
Oh my God.
It's one of my favorites.
She was 93 at the time of this image, and she was still teaching and teaching little kids. And this fellow came to me. His name is Sandro as well. So it's part of my Sandro series, Sandro Miller. But he came to me dressed like this. And this is all his own regalia. And these are turkey feathers. And he works in a poultry plant. But he was carrying this hat. And I said, I'll make any portrait you want, but I need a portrait of you in your hat. And he had just gotten this hat for his birthday from his brother.
Funny.
He's a medicine man who loved Jack Skelton on his bandana, a character from a Tim Burton movie about Halloween. And so that was the medicine man's land I slept on. And this is a woman who participated in the Sundance ceremony, and she earned these 2 eagle feathers for the work that she did.
It's beautiful. 3 or 4 generations?
3 generations. This is the woman whose jawline reminds me of my grandmother, her sister Glenna, and Glenna's daughter. And this is Jackie behind her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me with some elders. This was in France. This was used, these are Native American veterans. This was at the American Cemetery in Normandy. And this was used for the documentary that I spoke about earlier. As was this on the beach. I was standing in the water, and this is a panorama. It's 2 images stitched together. So they had a water ceremony there. They brought me over there to work on that documentary. There was a delegation of Native American veterans, and every year they go over to Normandy and they do a ceremony. They do a water ceremony, a smudging ceremony. This is right below the park. The park is right up here where you see these American flags up in the left here. That's above, that's Charles Shea Park. They do that for the people who perished in the first wave of D-Day. There were about 500 500 Native Americans who were part of that D-Day, not just on the first day, but protracted in Normandy.
Mm-hmm.
Whoops. It wasn't supposed to be there. And the last set of images, if I haven't bored everybody enough, are jazz and blues artists from Chicago. I've loved jazz and blues since I heard Louis Prima when I was 4 years old. And so I've been making images of blues artists. Some are color, some are black and white. He's wearing Jack's hat, my stepfather's hat. His name is Erwin Helfer. He's 84 now, and he's just getting over COVID, but he's getting better. This poor fellow has had 5 strokes. He can't play guitar anymore, but he's in the Blues Hall of Fame. And he's holding at least $100,000 guitar. It's an original 1957 Telecaster
And
that he's had since it was new. So I didn't want to make a portrait of his face because you could see that he had had some strokes and he can't play anymore. So we decided that this would be the most powerful way to show him at this time. She's 300 pounds. A lovely woman, just absolutely lovely, but I had to really play with lighting. That's a vintage hat. Those are feathers. That hat is from 1963.
I think it belonged to my mother.
Yes, Ben.
This was one of the first blues portraits I made. And I went to high school in Milan. And I said, man, you know, I saw Muddy Waters in Milan in 1979. And he said, he was on that tour. He was playing rhythm guitar. I said, really? Where did you stay? And he stayed about 100 yards from where our apartment was. And I saw he was on that tour. I saw Muddy Waters on that tour. Really a nice guy. Rick is his name, Rick Creer.
I love these.
These are a husband and wife, and they both play bass in a band.
Such a good portrait.
It reminded me of Maplethorpe, Barbara.
Mm-hmm. But talk about black and white photography.
Right.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
She was going through some kidney cancer at the time. And he's one of the sweetest guys, but has this dark, dark skin like Miles Davis. And I said, just look at me like you want to hurt me. And that's what he came up with. And it's so foreign to him. He's really a sweet guy. And those are all the images, folks.
Oh, this was fabulous, David. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really all I have. I mean, I have a couple of videos if anyone wants to see them. Okay.
You could
These are
just,
not videos of me making platinum prints, but about the process.
Anyone?
Yes.
that you could probably send.
I see one.
Yeah, I have 2. If anyone wants to see it, this is Beth Moon. She is a phenomenal platinum palladium printer. I got into this because of Irving Penn,
Yep.
who is the master. Here in Chicago, the Art Institute has one of the largest catalogs of his work, and you can make an appointment at the Art Institute and go and see his original prints. And I would make appointments every 5 weeks when I could get on the docket, so to speak, and I would send the librarian an email of all the images in the catalog that I wanted to see, and they'd put me in a private room. So I would bring my prints down there and look at Irving Penn's prints and get disgusted with myself and feel real bad about myself, and then I go work real hard. And so that's how I learned how to print. But Beth Moon is a really lovely lady who helped me out quite a bit.
Nice.
And so I'll turn the sound off on that. It really doesn't matter what the sound is, just music. There's no speaking. We take paper And some of the paper is cotton-based, some is linen-based, and we have to age it. And we take this pure paper. She's rolling on it some fumed silica as part of her process. I don't use that in my process. But she makes it very ceremoniously. And I like that. And she mixes platinum, palladium, and ferric oxalate. That's called a bar, a coating bar, that she is putting that solution over the paper, and that solution then dries into the paper.
Mhm.
And then we let it dry. And it can take, depending on the humidity of the darkroom, can take a day or so. This is her UV exposure, and what you're seeing here is a negative that's the same size as the coating on that piece of paper. So if I need a 20 by 24 print, I have to make a 20 by 24 negative.
Mhm.
On the edge here, what we see is rubylith, which was used way back in the day with printers that actually stops UV light. And she likes clean borders, so that's why she uses rubylith. And I'll show you what I mean in just a second. She's going to expose with UV light, and I have to use specialized glasses because it's like sunlight. And once that's done, we put it in a large tray, and then we quickly pour the developer on it.
Wow.
And she has spent 15 years photographing trees.
It's Madagascar. Baobab trees.
Mm-hmm.
Like umbrella pines.
We wash the print, and there's her dog, Schmaltz, I believe.
Oh,
That's phenomenal.
ooh, wow.
Beautiful.
That's in Africa, I think.
But she did a project called Odin's Cave about and with these birds.
It's maple coffee.
Wonderful.
So what is it about this process that produces the particular kind of image you want? It's hard in this reproduction of reproductions through the, through a screen to see just what the characteristic is. Can you talk about that?
I can, and thank you for asking. This platinum palladium was invented in the 1870s, and it was the way to print up until World War I, because they needed the platinum to make armament, and it stopped because of the war. However, the most interesting thing about that's the logistical image. When we coat the paper, the coating goes into the paper. The image becomes part of the paper. It becomes an art object. It has a three-dimensional look to it and feel. It becomes an art object instead of simply a print. Depending on the paper, and some papers can last 1,000 years. And the papers I've been using lately are Japanese washi paper that have been known to last 800 or 1,000 years. The image will last as long as the paper does. So a lot of the images,
There's no fade.
And here's one of
Oh,
that
it's a
little
little
girl
girl. Yeah.
on that paper. I started because I was working with the Native Americans. I was just learning how to print at the time, and I thought, boy, this is really interesting. And it occurred to me that I'm using a Japanese paper with the European process to honor Native Americans. But it's one of the hardest technical printing processes around. There are not that many who do it commercially in the United States. One fellow in Portugal who's very, very good, one in Switzerland, one in Belgium, and there's three, 4 or 5 in the United States and Canada, 3 that I know of very well in the United States, and one fellow in Canada who's quite good. It just isn't done anymore. But again, it's what Irving Penn did.
Right.
And he was the master of it. And I was just able to go and see the work, and it just knocked my socks off. And it just responded to me. Again, it is almost a matte finish unless we do something with the print afterwards. And some people will use a little bit of beeswax, natural beeswax that has been heated, and a little lavender oil that is added to it, that we coat the finished print to give it a semi-gloss. Not a gloss finish, but not a matte finish either, and it deepens the blacks.
You know, David, it's not unlike doing a sepia drawing and highlighting it.
Absolutely. It comes from the pictorialist movement, I believe.
Okay.
So that is
Hmm.
the kind of printing that we do in
I'm
the
just
house.
curious if you've ever heard of a Parisian by the name of, I think he pronounces it Percoli. Percoli.
I don't think I have.
He did a book about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it's called Ma Vie à Paris. And
VIE.
Ma VIE, right? Ma Vie à Paris.
My
And
life in Paris.
exactly.
Mhm.
And it sounds, I've forgotten exactly what it was, but he's discovered an old printing process that I believe used platinum in it and loved it. And they started, he and his partner started this publishing printing business in Paris, making these beautiful, beautiful books. And I don't know. I just remember reading about it, but it sounds like there's somebody in Paris who has got a very similar interest to yours that maybe you should get a hold of.
Thank you. I just put him in my phone. I'll look that up.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon right now.
Okay.
Harry,
Ma Vie à Paris,
Ma Vie à
a
Paris, yeah.
guide like no other. Mhm.
Yeah, right.
his name is Pericoli.
Pericoli, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
PERIC.
Dueling iPads as we look up reference.
What I read about it though was the tremendous respect he had for paper and for process and for bringing out the best of both and making these wonderful images. And there just were like 3 or 4 pictures. And this was in a magazine. It was a high quality art magazine, but the images were just fabulous. They were.
It's a tough process, and one that I respect. I have paper that I've been curing that I inherited from someone. I got a pack of paper that's 25 years old.
Whoa.
And I have some paper that's curing that the mill was in business for 400 years and then went out of business 4 years ago.
Oh,
And so I bought some stock of it, what they had left. There's some paper that I use out of the oldest paper maker in the United States is in Indiana. It's called Twin Rocker paper. And I went to visit with them and I bought some of their paper. Hahnemühle out of Germany makes some paper. There's a French company that makes some paper, but much of my private work, I use Japanese paper that is handmade. It's a washi in the same way they've been making it for thousands of years.
yeah.
And so I've become a paper nut. myself and have flat files downstairs and causes angst in our life.
It's so beautiful though.
It is. And I actually,
Paper itself is an art sometimes.
it is. I print for other photographers as well. There's a printing house here in Chicago called the Print Lab. And if you go to their website, they mention platinum printing, and I do all their platinum printing here.
Yes, you do.
And so,
Well, if you contact this, I consider him an artist. I would be curious to know if you become friends, because I think you probably have so much in common. It's going to happen.
it's some crazy. I gotta tell you, there's certainly some craziness to it. How do I spell his name again?
It was Pericoli.
Well, she has it.
Pericole.
I
I.
Pericoli. Pericoli. That's it. Pericoli. Pericoli.
David, let's go back to gallery view of everybody.
We stop sharing, and there we go.
we go. Hi, Anu.
I've been listening. Hi, everyone.
No, but I didn't
Wow.
see you.
This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank
Oh,
you.
this is
Fascinating.
fabulous, David.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So that's some of the work I've been working on lately.
I don't know how you have time in your life to do everything you do.
Some people call it ADHD.
Well, that was a lot of years ago.
I have another question for you.
Yes.
I'm curious about motivation. And I think that you have picked something that is unusual in terms of portraiture, but then combining that with Native American population. And I'm just wondering how you got to that point of deciding. Did you just fall into it, or did you see, what was it about that populace that was appealing to you, or was it just a contractor? Well, I mean, how did that marriage occur? Because you really do a wonderful job with the faces, especially of the women.
Well, thank you. I was born and raised in Italy. And in Italy, they made spaghetti westerns.
Oh, that's right. What's his name? Robertson or what?
San Leone.
Yeah, that's right.
And I saw every one.
But how did that get you to the Native Americans?
How did
here?
that exactly?
Well, I always had that fascination. And that and jazz and blues. I don't know why in my head that was just such a big deal, but it was. And in the United States, and I told Barbara, this is kind of a joke, but I also studied Buddhism for 20 years, and I call it the yin yang and the bang bang. But that's really just being silly. It was really something I wanted to do, and I ended up being a translator for some Italian ethnographers who went out to an Indian reservation, and there were some photographers too. And so while I was there, I started making contacts and kept going back. And then I would get picked up to make a movie. And some of the movies got funded, some did not. And so I'd made a series of images and just kept going. And if the movie wasn't funded and didn't get made, and I didn't get paid, those images became mine.
Okay.
So I kept getting introduced to people. And I almost fell into it, Jack.
Michael.
No, that's Michael.
Sorry.
That's
No,
okay.
I mean, Jack's name is on the image.
Jackson's name. We were
Yeah,
using,
but it's Michael.
yeah.
So that's really the story. I kind of fell into it. And because I'm Jewish and born in Italy, I don't really have any ties to how the natives were treated, in the sense that they saw me as an ally not as someone who was perpetuating harm. to them. Also, I was pretty interested in their way of life. And so I was asked to go, and I've given flesh offerings in some of those things. And not so much, Mom, I didn't go that far.
I know what you did. I know. Sounds
And
horrible.
I've been to the sweat ceremonies and I found it lovely. And I just found they're just to be lovely people.
David, I just want to encourage you to think about what you want to do with these things in terms of leaving them to an archive or leaving them to a library or something, because some of them really are great documentations of people during a certain time and a certain condition. And sometimes people don't think, oh, they're mine, I don't worry about it, I'm just collecting them. But sometimes you meet photographers and artists like yourself that really have these wonderful, worthy records of times. And I would think that the Newberry or someplace or would be interested in many of your photographs because they're great records. So I just want to encourage you to, not just leave them for your children to say, I'll take this one, I'll take that one. But
David, do you have any contacts at the Smithsonian?
I do. And I've had
because that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I've had some of my work there. Some of them are going to end up in a book.
Okay.
That's another project down the road that I'm formulating. And that's on specific subjects. But I have had some images at the Smithsonian and some at the VA, but that's not very permanent. I've got a couple of images of the Omaha tribe actually going to a museum in Germany, in Berlin. Because in the 1800s, some people from Germany came to Nebraska, and I don't know why or how, but they bought a lot of antiquities at that time. They brought them to Germany, and they wanted to honor the Omaha people. So they contacted some of the spiritual leaders there that I know, and they have gotten funding from the German government, and we're supposed to open in 21. The museum, but it should be open in 22. So some are going to museums, but thank you.
I just saw there's a National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C.
There is. I know I met the director. I don't know the director.
Would that be inappropriate?
It might be an appropriate place. It depends on conditions, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But absolutely open to
I
all.
think it's a wonderful documentary. I love it.
Thank you.
So those portraits are really great.
Thanks. It's a lot of work. I mean, I would take everything out there by myself. I mean, I would grab a kid or someone to help me put up a backdrop, but other than that, I did it all myself. Would bounce around different reservations in an old station wagon. Meet people I had never met before and I'm set up in an old hospital. It was built in 1905, finished in 1905. The first Native American MD. And I was making portraits of her ancestors in her hospital that she raised the money for.
And where was that?
That was in Nebraska as well, in Walt Hill, Nebraska. And Susan LaFleur.
Is she the one that became a doctor because she was sick and the Anglo doctors wouldn't take care of her?
Correct. And she graduated in women's college, which is now Drexel University, in 1895, 1896, something like that. Went back to Nebraska to a reservation in Walt Hill, which is near Macy, and built a hospital. And she covered almost 500 square miles, some craziness like that, horse and buggy, and stayed there until 1912. And her ancestors, I made a number of portraits of them. And they're using some of the proceeds to restore the hospital.
On a similar passion on paper, I don't know if you probably know this. Hollanders, have you heard of them?
Mm-hmm.
And Talus, they have great Shiogami paper, and sometimes they give a great deal. So they have wonderful washi paper and a whole slew of Japanese paper that I coup over in my basement.
Well, some of them, and Talos is one of the better suppliers. They get some of their Japanese paper from a place in Canada.
Oh, where?
A Japanese paper place.
Got it.
It's hard to remember.
No
A
worries.
Japanese paper place it's called?
That's what it's called.
Wow.
Talos is very good. It's very good.
It's been so wonderful.
This has been very interesting.
I've spent time on Pine Ridge, or through as a friend was working with the tribe after meeting Russell Means, which is a whole other story.
Oh, yes, he showed up in turquoise too
Absolutely.
at a Joffrey Gala.
That's exactly right. Where the first time a dance was done with a Native American choreographer. And you must have gone to the Conoco station there, which is the de facto community center. And we met with some women of the Lakota, sitting in a booth, talking about what was going on, and a couple of things. One is I learned that women across culture really can communicate really easily. All you have to do is say men. I suspect you could do this anywhere in the world.
Right.
You'd connect. But they talked about how much easier in many ways it was to be a Lakota woman than to be a Lakota man, in that the things that women do and from which they derive their worth and identity of being, wives, making homes, feeding children, raising children, those have not changed in many ways over the millennia. So they are able, even in this society, to feel good about themselves for what they do. They said to be a man, a Lakota man, you were someone who protected your people, protected your tribe. It was simply not, you could not be a successful Lakota man as a farmer, which is what everyone sort of wanted them to transition to. And the Buffalo weren't be a hunter or a protector. But I'm not surprised that so many have gone into the military, because in a sense that is being
protected.
As an American man, it is being a protector, being a warrior, being that is part of an ancestral identity. So does that vibe with what you found when in
It does. It's now a Shell station. It's not a Conoco anymore.
Oh.
And I mean, everything in there is fried. You sit in the booths and everything is fried.
We just drank coffee.
Right.
Coca-Cola.
Right. But there's a lot of issues. There really are. Loss of hope is the biggest one. That's really the one that I found was transcendent. By the same token, I found a dignity among those who did not lose hope, but a majority lost hope and they crawled into a bottle. Some of them, drank cough syrup to get high. It was
years ago. David and the girls and I were out in Santa Fe over Christmas, and were told you've got to go see the Christmas dancing at, I don't know if it was one reservation or several. And we spent a lot of time trying to find where dancing was happening, because time is not linear within the culture. So finally, we found one area where dancing was taking place, and I looked at David, I need to get out of here. It was so depressing, because it was a shadow of what it must have been when it was within ceremony and ritual. And this was dancing for whatever tourists were around at Christmas. There was no center to it. It was like dead birds flapping. It was awful.
That's part of the loss of hope, Barbara.
Mm-hmm. When you said that, those images immediately came to me.
I've seen that a number of times. And again, like any photographer or artist knows, not everything needs to be photographed.
Right.
Plenty of photographs
Absolutely.
don't make for that reason.
Hmm.
You know, it's a question of how do we want to live our lives? What kind of person do we wish to be? So I've had those similar experiences, Barbara, and they're very powerful. You know, when you want to get out of there, you want to leave. It's
Oh.
really horrible. I feel horrible when I see that.
Yep.
Um,
Because a dance that when it was ceremonial at a different time in their history had to be powerful and had to have meaning and had to have context. This was appalling.
Yep.
It was commercial.
We're talking,
Well, it wasn't, the reasons were commercial, but
Mhm.
there was nothing commercial about the dance, Shari. It was just totally depressed. If it had been commercial, it would have been Disney-esque.
Was
But
devoid of meaning.
yeah,
Mhm.
it was accurate in terms of what the people were experiencing. And then it was fed back to the audience. The hopelessness. It was awful.
I've seen those.
Dreadfully sad. Dreadfully sad.
has anybody ever seen the Indian convention in Gallup, New Mexico?
No, but I've been to the Navajo one in Shiprock.
Okay. I mean, there are both. I mean, there's these types that Barbara are describing, and there are others that are quite different than that, more authentic. You know, it just makes me think when we talk about inclusion and we talk about, you know, human values and what we're trying to do now politically with Biden in the White House. How often, when we're talking about these groups, do we include Native Americans?
We're starting to.
It's about time, right?
Yeah, it is about time.
Well, we have a cabinet member. That's a start.
That's right.
Well, they have been for years left out. And I think some of the problems that we're talking about, especially lack of hope, we created. And I think that it's about time that we set about putting in place effective programs. And I'm going to get off of my podium because
Oh, don't.
I feel very strongly about it. My father's farm, the homestead, included Indian property, and my grandmother took us out, and there were still mounds on the property, and said, "You do not walk on this mound. You do not." And there was 3 or 4 of them, and it's a beautiful farm right on the Black River, and we grew up thinking that they were spiritual. And so whenever we saw a teepee or a canoe or anything that has Indian, we had a completely different feeling for it than friends of ours. And they never understood why we would always argue with them about Indians, because we had such a completely different perspective of them. My brother found a arrowhead on the river, and he brought it back to my grandmother, who was an artist. She was chipping glass in her studio. And she said, "Where did you get that, Lamont?" And he said, "I found it down by the river." And she said, "Show me right now. Show me where you picked that up." And so they went down. I'll never forget. I thought my grandmother never hit anything in her life. I thought that she went down, and he actually showed her where the arrowhead came, and she took it and she put it back, and she put water over it, and she left it there, and she said, "Now that is where it's going to stay. That is where nature put it. That is where it belongs. This
Oh,
is,"
wonderful.
and it was like, that's how we grew up. And I'm thinking, this wasn't part of our culture. This was part of my family's culture because of who we happen to be or where we happen to be, and who their values my family had. But it was a completely different, I really felt in a different place when my friends in school would talk about Indians, or I saw government policies about Indians, or I would hear about the alcoholism and, the lack of education. And it's really a crime.
It
It's
is,
really a
Michael.
crime because these native cultures were so beautiful.
I have a friend of mine who's from the Brule Reservation, Corn Creek in South Dakota, and there was a massacre that happened there. And he was taken as a child, and he was sent to Philadelphia.
Yes, away
You
from
don't
his
even-
family. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was placed in a family that was Italian, so he spoke Italian. And he was in the middle of, South Dakota. And he's one of the most well-read people I know. Ansel Woodenknife is his name, and a very sharp guy, never went to college or anything, but he's one of the most well-read people I know, and he was one of the best friends of, I'm going to butcher his name, but the Sherpa who helped Sir Edmund Hillary.
Tenzing Norgay.
That's who it is. He was a very good friend of his, and so we never know where we will find someone who has transcended.
Yes.
And so while we can see hopelessness and it's horrible and it's
There are
people
still,
or drunks or this or that, if we just hold out, someone will cross our path.
yeah.
Have for me in my life, and I've got a lot of living to do. That's one of the reasons I'm still inside and I won't take chance.
David, one of the observation you made in one of your questions was, do places have memory? Does the earth have memory? And many, many, many years ago when I was living in England, I went up to Loch Ness to watch for the monster. I was a member of the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau Limited, which had a tie with Nessie's outline. But one day with one of the women there, she says, I'm not telling you where we're going. You'll learn about it. And we went to a place called Culloden Battlefield. I'd never heard of Culloden. And you're walking, and we were talking, and then you couldn't talk because the negative energy in the area was so intense. Culloden was the battlefield where the British
Destroyed.
the clans and uniquely went after civilians. So it wasn't only soldiers, but the clans members. And it was, I couldn't breathe. And I said to my friend, what is this? What's going on? And that's when she told me the story. And you could walk, and then suddenly the air became so dense and so charged. And we'd take a turn, and there was another mass grave. Yeah, the earth has memory.
I believe it does too. I've been to some massacre sites. And in fact, in 2020, I was supposed to go to Auschwitz and, Buchholz and Poland and Germany to keep going with that project. We'll see if 21, what brings.
Who knows anymore? But I don't know if it's Treblinka or which of the camps that the birds no longer sing. Now, I learned that many years ago. I don't know if it's accurate. I've never researched it, but it makes sense to me that a place of such horror and such massacre and such brutality, why would the birds sing?
Right. Sally Mann, who's a photographer, did project called What Remains. And she's a wonderful photographer if anyone knows her. Sally Mann, I'll put her in the message in the chat here. She's a wonderful photographer. You know, these are questions that we ask as humans. And I think that for me, photography is just a way to communicate, much like dance or painting or music. It's just a way to communicate. But I don't want to, you know, bore everybody.
You're not. This is the group you can talk these things with.
That's right.
Water has memory. You were talking about land has memory.
Yes.
The river that you could watch, I guess, Mississippi River, it was rerouted through the, what is it called? Those engineers, Army Corps of Engineers. They're having huge issues that the river knows that's not its natural path. It's shifting. That's going to be a huge interest to all the shipping routes that are going through New Orleans. That has an entire memory. They've already realized it's shifting all those canals and things that they dug to reroute it. The river has its own idea. It doesn't like that. They've been measuring it. It's coming back. So land has memory.
Oh my.
Let's hope our S curve does not have memory.
Well, fortunately, we're of a certain age and are losing our memories, so we don't have to worry about it.
We don't, but if you're driving on it.
Just be a different S curve.
Right. Maybe
Go
a
back to the
W.
original.
Right.
But
Go
it's
back
so
to the F.
interesting because I can see it and other close friends can see even better. Almost every day there are 1 to 2 accidents on it, and the weather doesn't have to be bad. Get bad weather and it's nonstop. I don't know why people haven't learned to drive that, because my guess is most of the accidents are people who commute. So what happens? Inattention, the road rose up and attacked.
Yeah, but that's a loss of, you know, I hate to use the word mindfulness, Barbara, but it's being in the moment.
Use it.
It's overused, I think, but I think it's a question of people just thinking they're so important and having to be on the phone, having to, you know, text or this or that. You know, I'm have been a technologist, and that's the danger of technology. I remember seeing a kid when I was in the Navy. I know that's when pagers were just becoming in vogue. And I remember going to a restaurant that had a bar in it, and sitting with some friends, and this one of the guys had a pager, and he said he would get girls because he pretended to be a doctor, and that he was so important he had this pager. And I just thought, wow, so that's where we've come. But I think that technology has become, other than the pandemic, there's a downside to it where it does keep people isolated.
Yeah.
And that is horrible. The musical industry has been almost decimated because of
live music.
Live music, that's right.
Yeah.
Streaming, artists can't get paid anymore for really to make music. It's hard. So there's a lot of discussion around that. And I think that being inattentive and being in the car and listening to a book on tape while we're drinking our coffee or we're ordering Grubhub or whatever is just,
the lethality of the S curve has long predated that. My father, who died in 1978, used to say he wouldn't, you know, live long enough to see the S curve straightened, and he was right. It was still an issue.
Yeah.
You know, I saw an ad the other day for a washing machine that will text you when it's done.
Oh, please.
I
Don't
don't
even go
want
there.
to be communicated with that way.
No. I tell Alexa to shut up when she and if I say it too loud, she'll respond.
I've
When I
never had Alexa.
ask her what time it is when I don't want to open my eyes to look at a clock. And she now says things like, have a good day. And I'm thinking, no, I don't want to hear information. You can tell me the time, but don't wish me a good day.
Oh,
Yeah,
the
we,
one that I find hysterical at this point is when I've got my cell phone on and I guess I'm texting or receive texts, and whatever is going on, whatever the conversation is being copied,
Right.
the audio is becoming the printed word. And I'm going, no, it's none of your business.
That happened to me too, and I hate it.
I don't
Oh,
have that feature on. We've never used it. I got a Alexa or an Echo, whatever it was, for Christmas one year, for whatever reason, and I regifted it immediately. I don't want that in my life.
Is Sam still on?
Nope.
I have to say,
no, I
He's not-
don't know where Sam was or where he went.
He might have gone to pick up Colette.
I'm sure he
Okay.
did, but he's
But
the
this is recorded so he can go into
Oh, good.
YouTube.
And he'll know that I told everyone that he got me an Alexa. My brother.
I have 3.
I'm quite happy with mine.
I haven't purchased
I'm
any
limit-
of them.
I do not ask it to keep a grocery list for me or any of those things.
No,
It just
no.
plays WQXR really well.
It just turns on music for me.
Me too.
What's it
That's
that
its
you like
function.
in Buddhism? You studied it for 20 years.
I
How
have.
is it incorporated into your photography?
Um,
Besides one of the Buddhas facing the other way with the angels, with the
I
angels.
love that.
Thank you.
There must be more.
It's being mindful and in the moment, always. And being respectful of whoever I am making an image of or whatever I'm making an image of. It's there used to be, especially the Tibetan Buddhism, a whole Dharma art, and that's a whole nother discussion.
Ask Joseph, you probably know of it.
Say?
Joseph Houseo.
Joseph left.
Ah.
But
But you know, there was a school of thought of that. I just incorporated it as to being a person, a human. And so
a mensch.
Yes.
sure, that's our tradition. But it's of doing no harm and
Yeah.
really letting someone tell their story through images. I also almost never crop an image ever.
Right.
What it is. And whoever I'm making the images of and with, it's collaborative, and they have editing process too. So they get to tell me if I should throw it out or not, because I don't want to embarrass.
Well, I remember years ago when a gal who was an art dealer and she was looking at my material and she says, Barbara, you've learned the secret. You know how to crop. I said, I never crop.
Right.
She said, oh.
That's erasing.
Well, it's also, do we create when we make the image, or do we create afterwards? What is our intentionality? And so I think that's a question that needs to be asked. And that's one of the reasons I don't
That's
take
interesting.
pictures. I make them, and I make them with intention.
Well, David and I were talking the other day because I found out we have a similar view of things when I'm photographing in India. I smile at people, I point to the camera, and I ask, may I take their picture? People love being photographed. And then I'm mobbed by little kids who all want me to take their picture. And now in the digital age, that's fun because they can see it and you're not wasting film. But I have only had one woman say no, and it was during Diwali in the market area of some remote town. and she looked like the unhappiest person you've ever seen. I mean, in Yiddish, we
Maybe
call
she
it-
was.
Yeah, in Yiddish, we call it a verkrimpte punim, you know, just,
Sour.
and she did not want to be photographed. And why would I want to photograph somebody who doesn't want to be photographed?
You know, it's interesting. When I was in China in Beijing with Nona, Nona stood out like a sore thumb with her
Oh.
red hair and blue eyes. And everybody that saw her wanted to take a photograph with her. And it was this nonverbal communication because at the time she wasn't really speaking Mandarin. Well, she was a little bit, but not completely. And they would show that they wanted to have a photo taken with her. It was fascinating. It was just fascinating.
When we were in, where were we?
I don't know.
I forgot, but Thailand, and Tommy was a redhead, is a
Mhm.
redhead, and people kept coming up to touch her hair. They'd never, and this was, I thought, a somewhat touristy area, but they'd never seen it. They
It's
needed
genetically
to,
rare, no matter where you are. I mean,
right.
Right.
even in Ireland, not everyone's a redhead. So
Yeah. But this is David's daughter I'm talking about
yeah,
that has this red hair and blue eyes.
your daughter. Okay.
David's
There's
daughter.
other
yeah.
David
Right.
that I associate with this group. So
No,
Right.
my David. My David.
yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. I've got to go because I've got to walk a dog.
Okay, enjoy the dog.
His name is Enzo.
Everybody stay healthy.
What is his name?
His name is Enzo, and it's a Buddhist symbol.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the unfinished
Completes
symbol.
in the circle, not completed. Oh,
That's his name.
very Buddhist.
That's right. And Ferrari's first name, of course.
And it was Ferrari, but people don't know that. So if people don't understand, I just say,
David, this was so exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It was a lot of fun. I'm going
Talk
to.
later.
Okay. Ciao, mama. Ci
Ciao,
parliamo.
Lucio. Ci
I
voglio.
think your mother has been quelling this whole time.
Totally, but I always do.
Of course you do.
I speak to her every day. I will
Take care.
Several times. Ciao, honey.
Love you.
Bye now.
Ciao, ciao.
So much.
Bye.
Ciao, babe.